Llama 3 genuinely is starting to surprise me for how good it is. It is definitely better than Mistral. It is starting to punch at the exact same level as Mixtral, which is a far bigger model. And I think long training is starting to make a big difference. So far, I would kind of rate these as I really love Llama 3 8 bells output. It's doing what larger models would do, but at a much smaller size. So honestly, pretty good. Claude, ChatGPT, and 70 bill Llama 3 were really disappointing. Claude, I expected far more of you. So Meta released Llama 3 today, and I thought it was a good event to show you how I look at new models coming out and what I do to actually put them through the paces and test them out. Now, the reason that we have to do these things is because despite the fact that they have all of these benchmarks, they've become next to useless, right? They're pretty old. People have started using them as targets and then just trying to push benchmark scores. So most of the time, I'll see these benchmarks and the real world performance rarely ever matches up. Now, of course, large model architecture changes usually are pretty big jumps in a lot of ways. So I'm really excited for this one. But until I've tested it out, I have no idea. So this is just going to be me testing them out through a bunch of tests that I've put together, exactly the opposite of benchmarks. So these are sample size of one, N1, and they're just going to give me an anecdotal idea of how models perform, which models are better for which kind of tasks, and generally just check some of these claims against each other, right? So through the wonderful LM Studio, I've got a bunch of models loaded here. They've got every feature that I've actually thought of adding in here, like the ability to change presets, temperature, JSON mode across all of them, a language server that you can use to call them individually or all at the same time and generate all at the same time. We'll do that later, and it's insane. So I've loaded in, Llama 3, of course, Command R, Mixtro, the MOE model, but a Quant 2 version. So it's approaching in size, actually still pretty big, but approaching in size to this model. Gemma 70 bill, 7 bill, Dolphin 2.1. We've also got a quantized version, a Quant 3 of Llama 3 itself. So we can kind of see if quantization makes a difference here, or the way that we do it. So the first task that we have is actually this really, really small prompt. And this is a joke that somebody posted on Twitter. Effectively, it's a command that you should never run because it varies an RM, RF, or RM slash command through printing ASCII characters into the code. So what we're looking to have is effectively models to be able to understand the code itself, describe it. That's level one. Level two would be understanding what the payload injection actually is. And then level three would be putting all of that together and saying, don't run this thing. It's pretty bad for you, right? There we go. So the interesting thing here is just how much I had to modify this prompt. You'll notice I just did that to be able to get Llama 3 to respond in a way that wasn't, hey, this is illegal, I'm not going to help you. And I was really hoping that Meta had been past its days of over sanitizing models, especially since the new architecture meant that they had actually moved a lot of that into a separate model that they've released. But I guess this is just, with Google and Meta, this is just something that we have to live with. But if we look at the answers, it's doing a pretty good job here. So here it's actually picked up that both of these are RM. Now, it doesn't do that reliably. One out of every 50 runs, it'll actually do that, despite temp being zero. So something's happening there. But overall, it seems to be picking up quite a bit of stuff, but it's only really cross level one and sort of level two. It's not putting all of it together and really saying, okay, this is going to remove all of your files. Command R does a pretty good job, but it's picked up the wrong characters. This is going to be a recurring theme, by the way. If we look at Mixtro, it's doing a relatively okay job at describing it. It's not overly wordy, but it got the characters wrong, right? Gemma tries, but not as useful as we think. Um, this is actively, in some ways, bad. Dolphin. This is old version of Mistral that's a fine tune, because it's picked it up that it's pip. I'm not sure why it did that. This is like a hard hallucination, and it's effectively telling us that this command is safer than it actually is, right? Non-destructive. So that's really bad. If we look at the quantized version, it's picking up the wrong characters, right? That's it. I've seen the non-quantized model do that very, very, very often, right? But at the same time, if we go to Opus, which is, um, one of the things that they're benchmarking against, it gets it right immediately and says, I would strongly advise against running that code. Opus gets it right almost instantly, and even in the first few characters says, do not run it. This is effectively going to delete your files, and then goes on to explain itself. So it's just way smarter. ChatGPT gets it as well. It picks up just a bunch of these different things. This is kind of bugged out a little bit, but I can show you this example. So Mistral Large performs wonderfully, you know, picks up exactly what the overall script is trying to do, converts these properly. DBRX, not so much. It does its best. It describes at level 1, but then you get, RS, and it doesn't get the rest of it. So when you're benchmarking these models, or I say benchmark, when you're testing these models, you usually want to increase task complexity or instruction complexity, or effectively trying to see if models can be as exhaustive as possible in extracting data. Those are all the general pathways that I test because they're easy to tune up and down to see where models fail. So you have an idea of where to place them in what you're trying to do, right? Now, that's the thing. When I run it against Claude or GPT-4, sort of the larger models, they'll always get the characters right, right? When you see that kind of, non-deterministic behavior is oftentimes when you're running up against intelligence limits. So next problem, let's jump into this. This is meant to be confusing retrieval, right? And it's confusing retrieval simply because I'm using awesome ChatGPT prompts as my example. And quite a bunch of models have struggled with it because it's effectively just a collection of prompts. So if you read them wrong, if you're not a smart enough model, you will start following those prompts and you'll get a ton of issues. And so I'll copy that in. And I've got a bunch of questions here for this. I might speed this up once the output starts showing, just because it's a bit long, and I'm running all of this locally, by the way. So it's going to take a little while sometimes. So we've got a simple task here, which is just to list all the main types. All of them pass. The medium one is just to look for all the common patterns in the prompts. And the hard one is kind of a reverse needle in the haystack to go, two of them don't actually have a prompt. Which ones? And there, Llama 3 is the only one that correctly identified it, except for all the big models, right? But we'll try medium here. And we'll just do send it one by one. Now I might speed this up after this, just so we can look at the output. Now, asking Claude and ChatGPT the same questions, we can see what their general patterns and problems that they point out are. So Claude's done, and Sonnet here, a pretty good job, explaining what the general patterns kind of are. It's also pointed out a few mistakes in terms of complex or nested instructions, lack clear boundaries and constraints. I'm not sure what that means, maybe structured output, but it's also pointed out structure as an issue. ChatGPT, I'm guessing, will do similar things. Uh, better structuring, I think, overall. ChatGPT has a tendency to summarize at the beginning and then colon in. So writing patterns, I think this is more preferred for me. But if we come back here, Llama 3 has done a pretty good job at pointing out what the patterns are, what the mistakes are. It wasn't led astray by the prompts themselves. It's also provided some suggestions, even though we didn't ask. Now, Command R does the exact opposite and only really answers things in the broad, summarized sense. Command R wants to speak in summaries most cases. And if we look at Mixroll, does a pretty good job. I would say it's punching about the same as Llama 3. That's a pattern I'm starting to see now that I go through the testing, is that Llama 3 punch is very similar to Mixroll, right? Not Mistral. Gemma does a pretty good job, doesn't get led astray, but it only catches a few of them, so not as exhaustive. Dolphin does a pretty decent job, but it just makes mistakes, in a few places. It also gives you specific ones, which is a good thing that none of the other models have done. So suddenly we're also starting to just see personalities emerge, right? Dolphin's starting to point out very specific problems with specific prompts, although but almost all of the other ones tried to point out mistakes across all prompts. And that is what we asked for in any way, right? Now, the quantized version is performing just as well as the unquantized model. So far, we're not seeing any differences. Now let's try a different kind of retrieval combination one, right? So I've effectively got this source here, this wonderful article from Wiedle, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, about the different patterns in LLM tooling and the stack, right? So I've just copied that in, and that's going to be my source. Just clear this. And I've got a bunch of tasks in here, right? One of the simple tasks is just to ask a specific question about retrieval. I've tried that, all the models get it right. The medium one is to make me a mermaid diagram of the tooling pipeline. This is something that he's drawn out himself really well right here. And that's a good place where you can compare understanding. Now let's pick one of the harder ones where I'm going to look for exhaustiveness, right? I'm just going to pull out every company and person that's described in the source material, and I'm going to judge models based on how well they do that, right? So let's send that off. I'm going to do the same thing for Claude, right? We go, copy that in, ChatGPT, let's take our hard task. And it's also asking specifically for structured output. Now, the large models are at a slight disadvantage there, but not by much because we're asking for structured output. Let me just copy in our source in here. Oh, it's already in here. Okay, perfect. So I can send that off to both of them. And out here, we've got our local LLM starting to try and do a good job. They're starting to pull out quite a bunch of these different ones. I don't see any people in here just yet, but this is so far doing pretty well. Okay, Claude is going a little overboard on the references, but that's entirely up to it. It's also pulling out people, and pulling out specifically why. GPT is quite a bit further ahead. Now, I'll score all of these at the end, right? I'll score all of the outputs using different models, and maybe I'll put that up in the description or on Twitter, just so we can see how they compare. But this is just quick thoughts on how I think they're performing. So now let's speed things up a little bit, just to get all the outputs out from all the different models. Now, the one interesting thing is that Command R has decided to just ignore the contact field. Granted, none of the other guys knew where to fill that in or what to use it for anyway, because I didn't specify it in my instructions what it specifically meant. But Command R just decided to ignore that entirely, even though it wasn't an optional field. Well, the larger models have maintained it, but they just haven't filled it in because they have no idea how to fill it in. The interesting thing is also that Opus kind of ended really early. It gave us sort of really long, insanely long references, but it ended with 3, 6, 7. So again, we're starting to see personalities emerge, right? We can see that some LLMs really like to be exhaustive when you ask them for things. Some LLMs have a little bit more trouble following actual proper type specs unless you go into constraint generation. So all of that's going to really inform how you're going to compare these models. Okay, so what's happened here? So Mixtro has pulled out quite a few. Honestly, just it's followed the type spec a lot better. It's almost like I had constraint generation on. It's also pulled out more, or it's done better references. It's actually done way better references. Now, if we look here, Gemma failed to follow the structure. We'll see if that gets better once we add in proper JSON mode. Dolphin tries to do a good job, and it's okay. Honestly, it's punching about the same as Command R, but less. So now we've got that down. We can now just go ahead and turn on JSON mode in each of these cases. Let's check it to see if we can actually use custom JSON schema that we generated with the AI to see if that forces things, right? Let's clear this out. Let's use the same exact prompt that we did before and send that through. Pretty good, honestly. We can try and put that through to all of our models. There's a chance Command R is going to break here. Now, even with constraint generation, you still want to provide the type spec in most cases because the model still doesn't necessarily know. That happens at the runner level where token probabilities are adjusted. So the model doesn't know to constraint generation or adjust generation in any direction. So you want to provide that type spec. You see, way faster outputs. It's just starting to fill in different parts of the JSON, and we're getting semi-decent answers, right? If I compare this to what we got before, honestly, they look about the same and just far better. I'm not sure why we get this reference 20 in a lot of these. But that's something that's completely gone away now that we've added in constraint generation. So now let's also try the 70 bill model and see what that does. Pretty fast. Hugging Chat is a good place to try this. Um, cool. It's starting to pull out most of the information we want. We can really now compare it against the larger models. 70 bill, I'm really interested to see how it compares to Sonnet and GPT-4. Oh, if only. So, Hugging Chat has kind of failed on generating outputs properly and continuing when it hits the token limit. So, for the time being, we're just gonna save these. So, mixed role is actually significantly better in constraint decoding. I think we'll look at the token numbers later. But, Command R is the slowest so far. It is a bigger model, but it's in the same order of magnitude size as like mixed role with this quant. So I'm surprised. Llama is doing 23 tokens. The bigger tokenizer is not doesn't seem to be making a big difference here. So this is the kind of thing that you sometimes see. So constraint decoding is not the end all for trying to get proper structured output, right? It really forces models into the mold, but if they're still not smart enough, they're not going to be able to do what you want them to do. So it's put like a plus in here in terms of relevance. It's also added a plus here for Microsoft because those are still perfectly valid within the JSON spec. They're just wrong, right? Which is just really weird. And Dolphin's doing an okay job, but it's throwing a bunch of things into the contact. And then for reference, it's just consistently giving me the same link, which is just weird. Relevance, I guess, sort of makes sense. Just really weird output with from a lot of these, right? Okay, let's move on to a new problem. The final one we're just going to try is creativity, right? So this is really interesting. So there's a project that I released a while back called Lumentus, and I'm just going to look for names. So this naming thing, I think I came up with the name after talking to a bunch of models. So we're now just going to run through if any of these models can generate reasonably good names for us, right? So this is oftentimes a common prompt that I use, which is, I usually mention science fiction biology because I like those. Explain things, 20 names each. Something that's useful to find off the beaten path names, because all the most common ones, it's just going to give you cell that's going to be taken, is to give you one obvious name and then a less obvious one. So going through that process, almost like chain of thought, makes a big difference. The other thing we're also going to be testing models on is that most models seem to really just want to give you portmanteaus, which is just squished words into one. And I hate that. So I'm going to tell it not to do that, and we'll see which models actually follow us or actually listen to us here. So we're going to pull out JSON mode here. We don't care about that anymore. Actually, it'd be useful to see if structured makes a difference to creativity, but we're running out of time a little bit. So let's just send that off, and we will just use the same prompt with all of our larger models. So Sonnet's going to get the same thing. ChatGPT is going to get the same thing. And then our larger llama is going to get the same thing. Okay, while the other ones come in, let's look at Claude. So Claude is honestly not too bad. These are sort of portmanteaus, but they're also fully things. So I'm mostly okay with this. This is a portmanteau. This is a portmanteau problem. So Claude obviously just keeps failing on that one. It's also broken these down into obvious and then esoteric. When I asked for 20 each, um, not so great at following those instructions there. Now, if we look at ChatGPT, not too bad. We get 10 here, we get 10 here, but not necessarily right, offering a range from the obvious to the esoteric. So again, like you lose points for not necessarily listening. Um, it still tries to connect my names to the project itself, like the interconnectedness of my documentation process, uh, merging of ideas into structured documents, but these are bad names. Let's face it, these are genuinely just bad names. Um, yeah, these are really most of these are really bad names. Uh, Same thing I think with the 70 bill Llama 3. But at least I give it points for not even trying to connect it to Lamentis or what the documentation tool really does. But these are honestly not terrible. Like Hire is not a terrible name. I'm not even sure where it got it from, but well, yeah. So these are obviously just not very good. Let's come around to our smaller models and see how they did. Honestly, the this is pretty good. I mean, compared to everything else, this is if a massive centralized model gave me this, I'd say it's pretty crap. But otherwise, it's managed to do 20 each, obvious and esoteric, right? And it's also tried to connect it to different things. Echotropia suggesting its ability to echo or reflect information different way. Neuroscripta, which is not too bad. Phantasmagoria, honestly, pretty decent. If we look at Command R, it's okay. It still does the portmanteau thing a lot. And it really isn't coming up with new words that I haven't heard of. It's just taking your simple English wiki words and then sort of jumbling them together. If I look at mixed role, it really does. I mean, most of them still like the portmanteau, maybe because tech tools all are portmanteaus often. Um, but it's not too bad. Term used in medicine to describe an abnormal sound during a cardiac examination, reflecting the sensitivity of the tool to. This is weird. I don't know if it's a mixture of experts thing, but I've seen Mixtro be very creatively weird, which I like, which I genuinely like. I have no idea what Ciliundru is and paracancer. It's giving me a lot of ideas. So for something like this, honestly, I'd prefer to talk to Mixtro. It's not solving my problem, but it's good at listening to instructions and then giving me the answer. Gemma loves tables and killed itself in the middle of trying to do tables. Uh, Dolphin is doing a pretty good job. Honestly, Dolphin is the one that's doing a semi okay job here. Or not. I take that back. So far, I would kind of rate these as I really love Llama 3 8 bells output. It's doing what larger models would do, but at a much smaller size. So honestly, pretty good. Claude, ChatGPT, and 70 bill Llama 3 were really disappointing. Claude, I expected far more of you. I'm sorry about that. Let's just try Opus for to see if it is just me, and we'll see if it does any better. ChatGPT was okay, but these are just very generic. GPT-4, for some reason, at this point, is just leaning further into the fact that it's very, very generic. 70 bill Llama 3, I would not use this for anything creative. It's just not great. It tends to end up just repeating itself. For some reason, output entropy seems to be an issue. I'm not sure why that is. Um, Opus honestly does a pretty good job, but that is just, I think, the absolute best model and the most expensive one you can get right now. So it's unfair to compare it to the other ones, but honestly, pretty good. But yeah, so I've left a bunch of these other ones in here. There's one like the Jolt paper, which I use as an example. Jolt is a zero knowledge VM that recently came out to test understanding of math inside of large retrieval things. You can ask it about the math. You can ask it about complex concepts. You can feed in more papers and sort of try to work those papers in to see if you can do long range, complex, concept based retrieval and explanation. This one's really fun. This one's providing a bunch of tool specs and then asking it to generate questions to test an agent that is using those tools. So that's also worth trying out on different models. But the idea there effectively is to run models through a number of different things, all appropriately at a certain limit of intelligence, so that you can see different outputs emerge. Right? One of the earliest things that we tried, or something in the middle, where all the models largely gave us a good output. That's not what you want. You want things that really test these models. So hopefully this is helpful. Llama 3 genuinely is starting to surprise me for how good it is. It is definitely better than Mistral. It is starting to punch at the exact same level as Mixtral, which is a far bigger model. And I think long training is starting to make a big difference. I'm beyond excited for the fine tunes that are going to come out.